Hello from my side. I'm going to continue with some ideas that are opposing to that of the human self-domestication. As you have heard already, the self-domestication hypothesis suggests that, like mammalian domesticates, humans have gone through a process of selection against aggression, a process that, in case of humans, is self-induced. However, there are theories that extend those proposals and suggest that what underlies human social evolution is selection for socially mediated emotional control and plasticity rather than just selection against aggression. To some extent, researchers here do agree that human social evolution is more similar to that of other social mammals than to that of mammalian domesticates, and therefore it is incompatible with the notion of the human self-domestication. Okay, so the first, as you know, people are often described as domesticated, which generally refers to civilized and represents their distance from a wild or savage state of being. It was Darwin who first critically discussed the self-domestication idea from an evolutionary perspective. While he agreed that humans can have a lot of similarities with domesticates, he argued that the term domestication would be misleading in case of humans. And his main argument was that we were never bred by other species, and that's why and we also cannot use expressions like far more domesticate for humans. So now some different ideas behind the domestication. First of them is the understanding about domestication as a reduced aggression. Balaev defined domestication behavior as the ability of animals to have direct contact with men, to be afraid of men, to obey him, and to reproduce under the conditions created by him. He emphasized on teamness and reduced aggression in his research. And actually, in his experiments, he used a glove which was induced into a cage with a young fox cub, and most of the foxes were aggressive or fearful, but there were some of them which showed more exploratory behavior, and those foxes were actually bred after that. Somewhere in the late 20th century, the self-domestication have been centered around Palaev's definition of domestication and his emphasis on the teamness and reduced aggression rather than adaptation to human-made environments. However, late research has put into question the robustness of this definition. And such research came from Coppinger and Coppinger, which they proposed different routes to domestication than that of Balaev. They suggest that domestication of wolves into dogs involve an initial phase in which less nervous members of the group become better dump feeders in human habitats and eventually form the separate population. During this stage, there was the so-called self-domestication, which involved adapting to feeding opportunities in near human habitats, initially without any interaction and any human behavior. So this is the idea of domestication as adapting to feeding opportunities. And another idea is the domestication as behavior against aggression, self-domestication. We already discussed this. So this was the a model of bonobo evolution involving the formation of female coalitions which were against the male aggression. Scientists called the outcome of this process a selection against aggression self-domestication. During this domestication process, some critical behavioral factors were also changed. More stable parties were formed, extended female sexual receptivity, and much less significant reduction in relative brain size in comparison to species domesticated by humans were observed. And those findings brought up an important question. Can this set of physiological, social, and behavioral changes be described as an outcome of self-domestication process rather than as the outcome of selection for cooperation and emotional control, such that is typical for many other high social mammals? And this is a brief overview from the last slides. For the human self-domestication, as we said, back in the past, usually we characterized this process as selection against aggression, and just more recently, as selection for prosociality. There are also other statements that claims that an important precondition for human cognitive evolution was the reduction of emotional reactivity, or suggestions that increased self-control can be pointed out as the hallmark of human social and cognitive affective evolution. In general, a more modernistic view claims that, especially in its late stages, human evolution is led by cultural evolution driven by language, music, and other cultural strategies rather than selection against aggression. And now we are going to discuss some similarities and differences between the humans and other domesticates. So as you know, the human self-domesticate hypothesis is based on the assumption that since humans share several traits common to many animal domesticates, they have gone through a similar selection process. The levels of behavioral affecting human hormones, for example, like serotonin and oxytocin, are such similarity, and more specifically, they are increased in humans and dogs and teen foxes. We also mentioned by now the increase in the morphological variation in humans, the prolonged play period in humans and other domesticates. So for all of those similarities, it is thought that they reflect a parallel evolution affecting the same set of genetic regulatory networks in humans and domesticates. However, the researchers that do not support the human self-domestication theory claims that these commonalities can be explained in a way that it's not committed to this hypothesis, and they're also pointing out some major differences between humans and domesticates. And this is a list of such differences. So one important trait that humans do not share with other domesticates is the reduced brain size. In fact, exactly the opposite evolutionary trend is often considered as a hallmark of human evolution. The reduced brain size in other domesticates can be explained as a result of selection against something, as a selection against aggression or a selection for the breakdown of a social structure. And through most of our history, the human brain size have been becoming bigger and bigger, and a slight different trend is visible for the last 100 and more specifically 40,000 and more specifically 10,000 years. But the scientists explain this with the settlement of the humans, with more reliable food sources, and with the, in general, more safety environment for humans. So as a second important difference between human and other domesticates is the type of aggression that humans display. The two different types of aggression have been distinguished: reactive and proactive aggression. Scientists suggest that humans share with chimpanzees a high propensity for proactive aggression, and this is aggression which includes purposeful, large, considered low arousal aggression acts. And we also share with bonobos a low propensity of reactive aggression. However, if self-domestication is defined as selection against reactive aggression, many social mammals, including meerkats and mole rats, should be also included in the self-domestication category. So the lower rates of within-group violence among humans compared to other great apes may be a result of violence being controlled both emotionally and socially, rather than the reactive aggression being simply reduced. So another important thing that we can mention here is the absence of subordination to another species and an increased dependence on other group members with regards to foraging, hunting, and outbreeding. And here there are more similarities with the same processes in wolves development than in dogs domestication. Humans' social ecology did not require docility towards domesticator, but rather emotional plasticity that can lead to a condition-dependent pro-social behavior among group members, as well as highly aggressive behavior, mainly pointed towards individuals which belong outside of the human social group. So the last thing that we are gonna mention here is the human abilities to create cumulative cultures, our learning patterns, which depends on enhanced attention towards actions of the others, which, as we already said, may explain the weight of our scleros. The increased emotional plasticity of humans also allows the modulation of emotional reaction on the basis of special social situations and norm-selective emotional control. And an interesting thing to add is that the selection for emotional control could account for the continuing increase rather than decrease in brain size in most of the human evolution. And as a conclusion, based on everything said, many scientists believe that incorporating selection for emotional control and plasticity can better account for the human behavior, affect, and cognition than selection for reduced aggression or prosociality alone. It also explains why some traits are shared with domesticates and others are not. So yeah, this was everything from my side. Bye for now.